Silence settled over the Galactic Concord Hall like dust after a collapsed starship, thick, glittering, and slow to drift. It was the kind of silence reserved for administrative failures, not moral ones, the sort that followed numbers projected onto marble walls. Delegates shifted in levitating seats, antennae twitching, frills tightening, pupils dilating in species-specific unease. At the chamber's center hovered a blue hologram of Earth, its continents scarred with red omissions. Those gaps marked hospitals. Someone had labeled them targets. No one spoke their names aloud. They were already past tense. The meeting resumed anyway, as protocol demanded, because order mattered more than grief here. Commander Elias Monroe waited at the perimeter, hands folded behind his back, posture polite enough to resemble submission. He wore a dark civilian suit, deliberately boring, as if daring the galaxy to underestimate cloth and bone. His expression held the calm of someone used to rooms that decided fates without raising voices. When acknowledged, he inclined his head slightly, apologetically. "Thank you for your patience," he said, warmth layered carefully into the translation. "We appreciate the opportunity to speak. Earth understands schedules are tight. We'll be brief." A few delegates laughed softly. They thought him harmless. They were profoundly wrong. Across the chamber, High Strategist Kaith of the Viral Empire leaned back, mandibles clicking with faint amusement. The Viral had led the campaign. Their doctrine favored decisive strikes, and medical infrastructure counted as morale, not sanctuary. Kaith's compound eyes studied Monroe with lazy curiosity, the way one examined an insect that had learned to stand upright. Nearby, Archivist Thalos of the Illyrian Compact watched more carefully, frond still, memory glands pulsing. Thalos had catalogued extinct species before. He recognized patterns when they began as manners rather than missiles. The presiding chancellor invited Monroe forward. As he crossed the floor, Earth's hologram rotated slowly, scars pulsing faintly. Monroe did not look at them. He did not need to. "Humanity comes today in gratitude," he began, folding his hands at the podium. "For the aid extended after the recent conflict. For the condolences offered. For the time." His smile was small, precise, like a surgeon's stitch. "We are a resilient people. We adapt. We document. We learn." He paused, letting translators catch up, letting silence work for him this time. Kaith clicked again. "Your species should consider itself fortunate," the strategist said, voice amplified, confident. The campaign ended quickly. Prolonged resistance would have been inefficient. A ripple of agreement followed from allied delegates. Monroe nodded, absorbing the word. Inefficient. He rolled it gently in his mind, like a coin that might later become a blade. "We agree," he said. "Efficiency matters. Especially when lives are involved." He let that sit, ambiguous enough to be ignored. It was ignored. Images appeared behind him, charts and timelines stripped of sentiment. Casualty curves. Infrastructure loss. Recovery projections. Monroe narrated without embellishment, his voice even, almost soothing. He did not say children. He did not say surgeons. He said numbers, locations, durations. The room relaxed. This was familiar language. "We've categorized the damage," he concluded. "Phase 1 losses are complete." The phrase passed without comment, filed mentally as bureaucratic shorthand. Thalas's fronds tightened. Phase 1 implied a Phase 2. He glanced toward Monroe, but the human's gaze remained fixed forward, courteous, unthreatening. "Earth requests limited access to Concord archival data," Monroe continued. "Navigational records. Historical precedents. We wish to memorialize accurately." He smiled again. "We're very serious about our records." Laughter bubbled. "Humans and paperwork." A harmless stereotype, confirmed. The chancellor hesitated, then nodded. "Access will be granted pending review." Monroe bowed his head. Gratitude performed perfectly. "Thank you," he said. "It means a great deal." As he stepped back, Kaith leaned forward. "One question," the strategist said. "Retaliation. Is Earth considering it?" The chamber stilled, hungry for drama. Monroe paused, then chuckled softly. Retaliation? He echoed, as if tasting a foreign spice. No. We barely survived the forms. More laughter. Tension dissolved. As the session drew to a close, Monroe returned to his place at the wall. His hands clasped behind him again, fingers pressing briefly, once, as if confirming something solid still existed. The Los approached, voice lowered. You hide your grief well, the archivist murmured. Monroe inclined his head. We've had practice. And your anger? The Los asked. Monroe's smile did not change. That's archived, he said. Classified, for now. The Earth hologram dimmed as delegates dispersed, already shifting to the next agenda item. Trade routes. Border skirmishes. Life went on. Monroe remained still, watching the scars fade into blue. In his inner ear, a secure channel chimed softly, a sound no alien could hear. He did not answer it yet. He waited, polite as ever, until the room emptied and the silence returned. Thinner now, sharper. Then he turned, finally, toward the ghost of his world and whispered, Phase 1 is complete. The council chamber reconvened with the faint smell of overheated circuitry and recycled air, the kind of sterile atmosphere that suggested nothing truly alive had ever suffered there. Delegates drifted back into their seats, robes whispering, chitin clicking, translators murmuring polite harmonies as if etiquette itself could smooth over atrocity. Elias Monroe stood where he had been left, hands folded, spine straight, face composed into a version of calm the galaxy found comforting, because it looked like surrender. He listened as the Chancellor summarized outcomes, permissions and restrictions, noting how often the word mercy appeared without ever brushing against its meaning. Across the chamber, strategist Keith spoke loudly with Allied commanders, recounting the campaign in tones reserved for engineering triumphs rather than civilian collapse. To Keith, the destruction of hospitals was not cruelty but clarity, a removal of inefficiency that shortened wars and simplified statistics. Monroe caught fragments of the discussion through imperfect translation, each phrase confirming what humans had already learned in Blood and Ash. The galaxy did not misunderstand the attack, he realized. It misunderstood humans. When the floor reopened for questions, a representative from the Trellick Combine tilted her crested head and asked, gently, whether Earth intended to rebuild. Monroe smiled with practiced humility, and replied that humanity had already begun, because waiting for permission had never been an effective survival strategy. Several delegates nodded, satisfied by the resilience narrative they preferred, the one where victims stood up, dusted themselves off and learned their place. Only Archivist the Los remained still, his attention fixed on Monroe's choice of words, rather than their comforting shape. Requests followed, procedural and dull, until Monroe raised a single finger with the careful politeness of a man interrupting his own execution. He asked for expanded archival access, not merely to memorialize losses, but to study strategic doctrines, medical conventions, and historical enforcement failures. The room stirred with mild surprise, then amusement, as if the request itself were evidence of human naivete. Keith laughed openly, remarking that studying rules after breaking them rarely changed outcomes. Monroe inclined his head in agreement, noting that humans valued precedent precisely because it revealed patterns worth avoiding. That answer earned indulgent smiles and the approval he needed. By the time the council recessed, approval lights glowed beside Earth's petition, granting access broader than anyone would later admit intending. Monroe exited into the quiet corridor beyond the chamber, footsteps echoing softly against polished alloy walls. A secure channel flickered to life in his ear, and a familiar voice spoke without greeting. All business now. Phase 1 is complete, the voice said, confirming what he already knew, confirming what the galaxy did not. Monroe slowed his pace, absorbing the weight of those words, then asked for status updates with the tone of someone ordering coffee. Responses came clipped and precise, detailing quiet preparations, diplomatic masks maintained, systems aligned exactly as planned. One report mentioned an Imperial relay station that had gone dark minutes earlier, dismissed by local authorities as a technical anomaly. Monroe stopped walking. He closed his eyes briefly, not in surprise but in recognition. the way one acknowledges the first crack in a long frozen river. "Tell them to log it carefully," he said, voice still mild, still human. After the channel went silent, Monroe leaned against the wall and exhaled, the mask slipping just enough to reveal something harder beneath. Far behind him, in the council chamber, strategist Kaith joked about glitches and maintenance crews, unaware that humanity had just confirmed its first hypothesis. Archivist Thalos, reviewing the same alert through separate channels, felt a chill ripple through his fronds. He accessed Earth's newly opened files and saw patterns forming too quickly to be coincidence. The humans were not rebuilding, he realized. They were aligning. And for the first time since the war began, someone in the galaxy wondered whether attacking hospitals had been a strategic mistake rather than a moral one. Monroe straightened, pushed away from the wall, and resumed walking, his expression once again calm enough to invite misunderstanding. In that misunderstanding, humanity found room to maneuver, space to prepare, and time to let its enemies keep talking. Somewhere deep in Earth's networks, protocols shifted from observation to anticipation. The galaxy mistook politeness for weakness, and the mistake settled in, comfortable and fatal. Monroe allowed himself one private thought, sharp and quiet, before the mask fully returned. They had misunderstood humans before, he thought, and history suggested that error rarely remained contained. Above Concord space, unnoticed amid routine traffic, data streams began to braid together, forming something less like a plan and more like a trap. No alarms sounded, no declarations were made, and no one thought to warn the species that smiled and said thank you. By the time the misunderstanding corrected itself, it would be far too late for explanations. Monroe's footsteps faded down the corridor, carrying with them the soft certainty that Phase 2 no longer depended on permission. Behind polite smiles and flawless posture, humanity finished counting. Numbers had always been the language the galaxy respected most, and humans were fluent. Each loss, each coordinate, each violated convention had been entered, cross-referenced, and quietly weighed. The misunderstanding persisted, deep and comfortable, even as the balance beneath it shifted. Somewhere very far away, engines spun up for reasons no council had approved. Monroe did not look back. He did not need to. The galaxy was still talking. And while it talked, humanity prepared to answer in a language no one could misinterpret. The misunderstanding had done its work. Phase 2 waited, patient and inevitable. It always did. Somewhere in the dark, something answered back. The corridor lights reflected in Monroe's eyes, steady and unblinking, as if already fixed on distant targets. Behind him, the Concord Hall returned fully to routine, unaware it had just approved its own audit. That audit would not be kind. Humanity had learned long ago that monsters preferred paperwork completed in advance. Smiling made them careless. And carelessness, Monroe knew, was the most exploitable resource in the galaxy. The misunderstanding continued, serene and absolute. For now. It would not last. Nothing ever did. And when it ended, the galaxy would finally understand what humans meant by response. Monroe allowed himself a thin smile, unseen by anyone who could stop what was coming. Phase 2 had already begun, even if the universe had not noticed yet. The misunderstanding was complete. So was the preparation. Only the consequences remained. They would arrive shortly. The galaxy was still smiling. Humanity had finished waiting. And soon, it would finish something else. Everything burns. The first alert reached the Concord as a whisper, not a scream. The sort of technical irregularity that clerks flagged for later review, while senior minds focused on louder crises. A medical relay above the Lothran Reach had gone silent, its signal dissolving into static without the courtesy of an explosion. Engineers blamed aging infrastructure. Commanders blamed lazy maintenance crews. No one blamed humans, because humans had smiled, bowed, and asked for archives. The galaxy had already decided what sort of creature did that. And predators, everyone knew, announced themselves with noise. Within an hour, 3 more relays dimmed. Within 2, a hospital world's emergency beacons failed mid-transmission, their last data packets freezing on images of empty corridors and unlit surgical bays. Panic tried to form, but it had nowhere to anchor yet, no single enemy to accuse. The Concord convened again, hurried this time, translators overlapping as delegates demanded clarity. Strategist Keith arrived late, mandibles clicking in irritation, already preparing a speech about coincidence and overreaction. Archivist Thelos arrived earlier than usual, fronds tight, memory glands firing with unpleasant associations. Elias Monroe did not arrive at all. Instead, his image filled the chamber, projected cleanly, politely, as if summoned rather than self-invited. He stood against a neutral backdrop, hands visible, posture relaxed. "Apologies for the interruption," he said, voice steady, almost regretful. "We noticed some confusion developing, and humans value transparency." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Keith straightened, irritation sharpening into suspicion. "Explain," he demanded. Monroe nodded. "Of course. Several Imperial medical assets have ceased operation." "That is correct." He paused, allowing the words to land without embellishment. "This is not a malfunction." Silence thickened, the kind that pulled at nerves. Thelos felt it then, the click of pattern recognition snapping shut. This was not chaos. This was sequence. "You dare," Keith began, mandibles flaring. Monroe raised a hand gently, the universal gesture of interruption. "Please. Let me finish. We learned from your doctrine. Hospitals are not sacred. They are strategic. Remove them, and wars end faster." His expression remained mild, almost academic. "You taught us that." Images replaced his backdrop, flickering into view across the chamber walls. Imperial campaign manuals, annotated, translated, highlighted. Phrases glowed briefly before dissolving. Efficiency. Morale collapse. Acceptable loss. Delegates recoiled as if the words themselves burned. "This is retaliation," the Chancellor said, voice thin. "You swore." "We swore nothing," Monroe replied softly. "We expressed understanding." His eyes met the camera with unsettling directness. "Understanding includes consequences." Reports flooded in faster than translators could smooth them. Medical stations offline. Cloning vats inert. Recovery fleets stranded without support. The Empire's logistical spine began to buckle, not under attack, but under absence. Keith barked orders, demanding counterstrikes, mobilization, overwhelming force. His voice cracked as projections showed something worse than destruction. Precision. Every strike avoided population centers. Every target was infrastructure, chosen with surgical care. This was not rage. This was study. Thelos spoke at last, voice low but amplified. "You are not trying to win a war," he said. It was not a question. Monroe inclined his head. "Winning is subjective," he said. "Ending behaviors is more reliable." The room erupted. Accusations flew, threats layered atop disbelief. Humans were too few, too damaged, too polite. Monroe let them exhaust themselves, then spoke again, his tone unchanged. "We did not attack your civilians. We did not target your young. We removed your ability to recover from choices you told us were acceptable." A faint smile touched his mouth. "We learned very well." Keith slammed a clawed limb against his console. "This ends now," he snarled. "We will erase your planet." Monroe's smile faded, not into anger, but into something colder. "You already tried erasure," he said. "This is documentation." The word echoed unpleasantly. Documentation was forever. He gestured and new data filled the air. Treaties violated, conventions ignored, timestamps aligned. Each Imperial strike against a human hospital glowed red, connected by lines to current outages across the Empire. Cause and effect, rendered undeniable. Some delegates began to withdraw, their species instincts screaming that this was no longer a council matter. Others froze, watching empires bleed invisibly. Thelos felt awe curdle into fear. Humans were not strong, he realized. They were meticulous. They had turned the galaxy's own rules into weapons, polished them, and waited. A junior aide burst into Keith's private channel, voice shrill with panic. "Sir, the outer fleets, medical support is unavailable. Casualties are..." the transmission cut off. Keith stared at the empty space, mandibles trembling. For the first time, he looked at Monroe not as an inferior, but as an equal adversary, and that realization hurt more than any strike. "This is war," the Chancellor whispered. Monroe nodded once. "Yes. But not the kind you prepared for." He leaned closer to the camera, the gesture intimate, unsettling. "We studied your responses. When pressed, you escalate violence. We escalated absence." He straightened. "Phase 2 is underway." Thalas's fronds quivered. "Phase 2." The phrase returned, heavier now. "What is Phase 3? The archivist asked, voice barely steady. Monroe considered him, truly considered him, for the first time. "Phase 3, he said, "is when the galaxy decides whether hospitals matter." He cut the feed without ceremony. The chamber descended into chaos. Orders countermanded orders. Allies demanded explanations. Enemies reconsidered old loyalties. Above it all, reports continued to arrive, each confirming the same terrible truth. The Empire could not heal itself fast enough. Wars stalled. Occupations faltered. Client species whispered of rebellion. The absence spread, quiet and relentless. Far away on Earth, Monroe stood in a dim operations room, screens reflecting in his eyes. Around him, humans moved with calm efficiency, coffee mugs beside consoles, jokes absent now, replaced by focus. He listened to updates, nodded, adjusted variables. This was not vengeance. This was enforcement. A technician glanced up. "Sir," she said softly, "Imperial Command is requesting a ceasefire channel." Monroe allowed himself a breath, then shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "They still think this is about punishment." He looked back to the screens, to the widening gaps where once there had been certainty. Let them learn. Somewhere in the galaxy, a hospital light flickered and died, and with it, an empire's confidence. The war no one had seen coming unfolded without banners or battle cries, written instead in outages and delays. The galaxy reeled, struggling to name its enemy, while humans adjusted parameters and waited for the moment when misunderstanding finally collapsed into comprehension. That moment was close now, heavy as gravity. Monroe felt it like a pressure change, inevitable and exact. Phase 2 had done its work. Phase 3 waited, patient as law. He straightened, smoothing his jacket, the polite survivor once more. Soon, the galaxy would ask the right question. And when it did, humanity would be ready to answer, not with rage, but with something far worse. The galaxy learned about extinction the quiet way, through reports that refused to stay local and questions that could not be reassigned. Empires did not fall in firestorms or heroic last stands. They unraveled in conference rooms, in hospitals without power, in fleets forced to retreat because their wounded could not be treated. Elias Monroe watched the cascade from Earth, hands resting lightly on the edge of a console, posture composed enough to resemble indifference. Around him, the operations room breathed with low voices and measured motion, people who had already crossed the bridge from grief to purpose. This was no longer response. This was resolution. When the Concorde reconvened in emergency session, its chamber felt smaller, as if the walls themselves had leaned inward to listen. Delegates arrived carrying fear instead of confidence, their translators struggling to keep pace with overlapping demands. Monroe appeared again by projection, invited this time, requested, necessary. His image was crisp, his suit immaculate, his expression unchanged. "We regret the instability," he said, opening with words the galaxy had used on Earth. "But instability is a symptom, not the disease." Silence followed, thick with understanding too late to be useful. Archivist Thalos watched closely, realizing that the humans had never hidden their intent. They had simply trusted the galaxy to ignore it. Strategist Keith did not appear. News had reached the Concorde minutes earlier that the Virile Empire's central medical nexus had gone dark, not destroyed, merely inaccessible, locked behind layers of code written in a logic unfamiliar to them. Their fleets were intact, their weapons ready, but their casualties mounted untreated, and panic rippled through command structures never designed for helplessness. Monroe addressed the absence with gentle courtesy. "The strategist is occupied," he said. "We understand emergencies disrupt schedules." The irony landed like a blade. He continued, explaining nothing yet clarifying everything. Humanity had activated protocols embedded in Concord law itself, enforcement mechanisms drafted centuries ago and ignored, because no one imagined they would be used against founding powers. Violations of medical sanctity triggered audits, audits triggered sanctions, and sanctions, once automated and distributed, cascaded beyond reversal. "You called these safeguards symbolic," Monroe said. "We took them seriously." Screens filled with confirmations as neutral systems complied, shutting down access, freezing assets, broadcasting evidence. The galaxy watched its own rules turn predatory, and some species felt a grim admiration alongside terror. The Los understood then that extinction did not always mean death. Sometimes it meant removal from relevance. The Chancellor tried to speak, voice trembling as authority slipped away. "This was never meant to be weaponized," they said. Monroe nodded. "Neither were hospitals." The room convulsed with sound, outrage colliding with despair. Monroe waited, patient, allowing the storm to exhaust itself. When he spoke again, his tone softened, almost kind. "This is not revenge," he said. "Revenge is personal. This is corrective." He explained the human calculus without numbers, because the numbers were already visible. Empires that targeted healers would be rendered unable to heal. Species that defended such doctrines would inherit their consequences. Others would be spared, even assisted, provided they withdrew support. The galaxy fractured along moral lines it had pretended did not exist. The Los felt history pivot, the way it did when stories ended and lessons began. Somewhere, a junior delegate began to cry, realizing their homeworld's alliance choices had sealed its fate. Monroe did not watch them. He had learned long ago that focus was mercy. Resistance came, inevitable and furious, but it arrived late and poorly coordinated. Fleets launched without medical support, commanders forced to choose between retreat and watching crews die slowly. Some chose glory. Most chose survival. The Alien Extinction War spread not through conquest, but through withdrawal, a vacuum that swallowed authority. Client species rebelled, citing Concord law, and humans supplied evidence rather than arms. Monroe approved releases with the same calm he had once used to sign condolence letters. Earth's networks hummed, efficient, restrained, lethal in their precision. This was the apex predator's truth the galaxy had missed. Humans did not need to dominate space, they needed only to deny it to those who violated their lines. As days passed, the term extinction took on a new meaning in Concord records, defined not by annihilation, but by systemic disqualification. Empires collapsed into historical entries. Flags were lowered not in defeat, but in irrelevance. Humanity watched, steady, refusing triumphalism, because this outcome had never been about pride. In the ruins of the virile command sphere, Kaith finally transmitted, mandibles dulled, voice stripped of command. "End this," he demanded, then begged. Monroe accepted the channel privately. He listened without interruption, the silence doing its work again. When Kaith finished, Monroe spoke quietly. "We will," he said. "When the behavior ends everywhere." Kaith raged, then faltered. "We did what worked," he whispered. Monroe's expression softened, almost sad. "So did we." He terminated the channel and documented the exchange, another artifact for the record. In the Concord, the Los closed his memory glands, overwhelmed. He understood now why humans smiled so often. It was not deception. It was control. They had carried their grief like a loaded weapon and waited for the moment when using it would change the future instead of merely expressing the past. The final cascade came without announcement. Automated systems completed their cycles, sanctions locking into permanence. The Concord's authority recalibrated itself around compliance rather than power. Humanity issued one last broadcast, brief, unadorned. Monroe addressed the galaxy not as an enemy but as a witness. "You asked what we would do," he said. "We did not answer then because answers can be misunderstood. This cannot." Behind him, The screen displayed a simple statement, ratified by surviving members. Medical sanctity upheld. Violators removed. The war ended not with surrender but with acceptance, the kind that followed earthquakes and extinction events alike. As the feed cut, Monroe exhaled, the tension leaving him at last. Around him, Earth's operators allowed themselves small smiles, not of victory but of relief. The galaxy would recover, reshaped, wary. Humans would return to rebuilding, carrying scars that would never fully fade. Somewhere far away, a hospital light flickered back on, powered by new accords and old lessons. Monroe watched the confirmation appear, then turned away. The Alien Extinction war was over. What came next would decide whether it ever needed to happen again.